Have you ever snapped at someone for being rude, only to feel guilty later? Or felt personally offended when a person you've tried to assist has ignored your help? Well, that gut reaction, that intense emotional response might not be about them at all. Imagine if 90% of what's happening is actually about you, your story, your wiring, your history. Today, we're diving into the psychology of self-awareness, of uncovering how our reactions to our behavior are often shaped long before the moment even starts. In this episode, we're going to explore the 90% rule. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Welcome back to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today we're flipping the script on behaviours. Not theirs, ours. So the 90% rule suggests that when we're emotionally triggered by someone else's behavior, 90% of our reaction is driven by our own internal state, our expectations, stress, past experiences, beliefs. Well, this isn't a hard scientific formula. It draws on well-established psychological frameworks. Let's ground this idea in a little bit of theory. So while the 90% rule itself is more of a kind of a practical metaphor, if you like, than a scientific law, it aligns closely with what research tells us about human cognition and emotional regulation. Neuroscientist David Eagleman, love his work, has estimated up to 95% of brain activity happens beneath conscious awareness. Similarly, Nobel Prize winner David Kahneman explains in Thinking Fast and Slow that we operate primarily through what he calls System 1 thinking, fast, instinctive, and emotional, meaning most of our responses are automatic rather than reasoned. These ideas validate the premise that much of our reaction to behavior is based on patterns and beliefs that we're not consciously choosing in that particular moment. First, though, let's touch on a theory around Albert Ellis's ABC model of cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, some of you out there may be familiar with the ABC of PBS, positive behavioral support, that looks at antecedents, behavior, and consequences. Well, in the cognitive behavioral therapy framework, it's slightly different. In this one, we refer to A being the activating event. So let's say, for example, a person refuses to follow an instruction, for instance. The B is for belief about that event, that they're disrespecting me, they're being rude, they're not valuing my opinion. And the consequence of that is then how we feel, the anger, the frustration, or the disengagement that we then encounter or we engage in from that behavior. So Ellis showed that it's not about the event, but about our beliefs about that generate our emotional responses. That's our 90%. Some of you will come across in CBT that, our behavior is caused by our thoughts and our feelings. And it's those thoughts, so scripts, so schemas that all kind of contribute to the feelings we experience and then the behavior. Secondly, though, consider the polyvagal theory as well, developed by Dr. Porges. And it explains how our nervous system responds to perceived threats all the time. If we're already in a stressed or a hypervigilant state, for instance, we interpret behaviors through a quite a defensive lens. We move into fight, flight, or freeze more quickly, not because of the other person's behavior, but because of our own regulation levels. So let's look at a few real life scenarios. So let's say in childcare, for instance, a 6-year-old, when asked to tidy up, throws a toy across the room or chucks the stuff away or whatever it is, and this untidy situation occurs. Your immediate reaction might be anger. This is unacceptable. Then you realize you were raised in a household where mess meant failure, that good children are tidy children, for instance. Okay? That order, an order that being tidy is how then you equal to love. So you must be tidy to receive love, so then you think that they should be tidy to receive love too. This child's behavior then taps into our deep need for potentially control or for managing that perception, that script. Let's say we took it like an adult support situation. So let's say a young adult with autism interrupts a meeting, for instance, and refuses to apologize. You may feel disrespected. On reflection, you recognize you've always needed that verbal acknowledgement, always that, hey, do you mind if I interrupt, to feel valued, to feel recognized. So their behavior feels personal, that they haven't contributed. They haven't asked you if it's okay to interrupt, but it's not. Or maybe it's a case of an individual working in dementia care, for instance, an older adult calls you useless during a care act. Maybe it's a loved one and they call you useless during something you're trying to do for them. And you feel hurt. But you've always been reminded of a parent, or maybe it reminds you of those times when you get criticized harshly for not being able to do something or for doing something incorrectly. That emotion isn't just about the moment, it's a flashback to old wounds as well. So these aren't conscious processes, but when we reflect, we begin to see some patterns. So let's say in a school setting, a teacher gets infuriated when a student rolls their eyes. To others, it may be no big deal, but to that particular teacher, it feels like disrespect. But that could be linked to their upbringing. Maybe they were punished harshly for even small signs of defiance. That belief then shows up in the interactions on a day-to-day basis. Maybe in family life, a parent becomes disproportionately upset when a teenager doesn't say thank you about something. It stirs something. I do everything and they don't even care. But beneath that, there's a deep need for validation and appreciation that might never have been met during our own childhood. And we're transferring into the relationship as we see it now. These invisible strings we carry into our reactions. But the more we notice them, the more we can loosen their grip. We all have these. We all have these scripts and schemas of what we think is right and wrong, or what we were told was right and wrong. And whether it's from transaction analysis, where it's the parent model, the parent to child kind of model, whatever it is. The big thing is that you can't control where other people go. You can't control other people's behavior. You only really have the ability to control your own, but you have to be able to recognize it in yourself. When you're taking something personally, there's a rule that I always refer to, which is nothing's personal. And although people argue with this, but it's always about the other person and then our feelings about it rather than it being a personal attack. So what can we do about it? First is we're going to pause before reacting. Now, some of you will have heard before that I always say we should always respond rather than react. And Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And that pause is where we regain our power. Number 2, reflect on the story beneath your reaction. Ask, what is this behavior activating in me? Is this about now, or is this echoing then? Is it something from my past? So some of you will be familiar from my book, Targeting the Positive. We've got the 6-stage target model. And I often refer to this, and I actually was teaching a group the other day and we were talking about it, that the 6-stage target model isn't just for managing or understanding behaviors of others. It should also be used on ourselves, identifying our own behaviors, our own thoughts, feelings, understanding where they come from, and then creating proactive plans of, well, how do I manage this? How do I reduce this? Then recognizing when they're starting to come, which is recognizing escalation, responding appropriately. What am I going to do next time? How am I going to respond rather than react if this trigger, if this situation occurs again? And then it's always that learning curve. We also want to build our own, emotional regulation strategies. We have to kind of be mindful that these do take us quite suddenly at times. It's, in the thinking fast and slow premise, that fast thinking, it's emotional, it's quick, it happens suddenly. So we actually need to be able to recognize our emotions and then know how to self-regulate, because it's involving 2 different parts of the brain, the emotional brain and the rational brain. I've got to reactivate that rational brain, bring myself into my calm state. So that could be using things like breathing exercises, grounding techniques like your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 have been in previous podcasts, visualization techniques to stay in the calm, like almost imagine, okay, they're going to push this button in me again. How am I going to respond next time? And then keep playing that over in your head. This helps shift from that reaction over to a response. And it's utilizing those strategies in that moment. But it could just be a case of when you feel that moment before you react, just pause, just go, I'll be back in a minute. Take yourself a step away, reframe, regain and ground yourself, and then go and respond to said situation. What's also not a bad tactic to do is what we call keep a trigger log. Keeping a trigger log is recognizing and start to actually log down what things upset you, what happened, what did you feel in that particular moment, what memory or belief do you think was activated, where might that have come from, what did I assume that the other person meant, or why, what assumptions did I make about that other person, and is there any evidence and truth behind those assumptions, or have I just made them up? Or would it be just because I'm putting myself in their shoes that I would have felt, or I would have been acting that way because of the way I would have felt in that situation? And I've done it myself where, I've ended up getting emotionally affected by something, and I had to reflect and kind of go, well, to be fair, if I'd have done what that person did to my dad would have responded exactly as I did. And that never means that my dad is a bad person in the slightest, but it also doesn't mean he was right. It may have been right for him in that moment, but is it still right for me in my moment? You can also do peer reflection or supervision. These spaces help you unpack 90% safely without blame, talking to somebody about it, whether that be a therapist or a supervisor, manager, mentor, whoever it is, to talk through where that came from. Now, why does this matter then? When you understand your 90%, you can then prevent escalation. You can offer more compassionate support because it allows you to then retain your rational self and look at things from a more curious rather than emotional point of view. It also allows you to model emotional intelligence to others. And role modeling is such an important tool for helping others manage their day-to-day life. And we can also set appropriate boundaries as well and feel less guilt because, again, we were able to respond rather than react. And here's the truth. The 90% rule isn't about making you feel bad. It's about making you feel empowered. Because once you understand your contribution to a dynamic situation, you can change it. What I'd like you to do is think of a time recently when maybe you felt triggered or emotional by somebody else's behavior. What belief or memory might have driven that particular feeling? Where could your 90% be?